Welcome to the No Quit Living Podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit Tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 251 of the No Quit Living Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is highlighting other people. Our quote of the day comes to us from Ilyana Van Zant. Don't get hung up on the hard times, the challenges. Tell your story by highlighting the victories, because it's your victories that will inspire, motivate, and encourage other people to live their stories in grander ways. It is my privilege to bring you today's episode. A few weeks back, I had the opportunity to be a guest on his podcast, and I'm honored to return the favor. Kristof Lewis is all about highlighting other people's stories, and I think you will really enjoy today's episode. Chris, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I am ready to bring it. We just brung it on my podcast, so we're doubling down, and I'm super pumped.
So full disclosure to our listeners, this is meaning Chris and my second podcast. I just recorded on his, and he's recording on mine, so it's kind of cool to do that. So if you have not listened to his show, definitely check it out. So to jump into it, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself either have a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up and given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for coming on. I think it's really cool that we could be able to help each other out and as guests, and then also the listeners, because everybody, I love having the conversation. So I'm humbled to be on here. I think my no-quit story is more of a story as opposed to an incident or a certain time in my life. I think I have a Navy background. I was in the military. I was in for 9 years, and I was told across the board not to get out of the military. I was a college dropout, and people thought I was just making an idiotic mistake getting out of the military. So despite the odds, I got out of the military and I got a job. And I think my no-quit story is just not quitting, listening to myself about the things that I feel as if I should do in my life. So I went ahead, I got out of the military about a year and a half ago. I got a job. I was very humbled to get that job. It was a good job, but it just wasn't right for me. Once again, people in my life thinking that I'm making a crazy mistake, leaving that job and going on to do something else. But I was true to myself. I left the job and it didn't really look great. I got turned down from a lot of other things. Again, not having college and things like that. But I listened to myself and I listened to what was right for my family as well. And I was able to get a job that not only paid better, but I work at home now and I'm able to spend more time with my daughter and my wife, which is something I don't take for granted. So I think, again, to reiterate, my no quit living story is more of the story of my life and just being true to who I am and not really listening what other people think is probably best for me.
I love what you said in the sense of being true to yourself. And I think we have a lot of people that I think in some ways think they know what's better for our lives, or they think they know us better in some ways than we do. And I think what happens is, you have that challenge inside your head of what you're saying to yourself, what you're questioning, and then when there are people out there. So I think it was really, really powerful that you touched on that. So before we jump into the rest of the show, I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about, your show and your podcast, because like I said, I had the honor of being on it, and I think it's an amazing show. So I want to give you an opportunity to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. And man, I'm just already thinking about, I'm so excited to do this. I know I already said it, but I just had such a good time on my show. And I'm consistently, we talked about consistency, and I'm consistently humbled by the quality of guests that I get on my show and the diversity of backgrounds that I get. So what I do, pardon me, is that I have guests on my show from as many backgrounds as I possibly can think of. I've had, you're a podcast host. I've had shark divers. I've had mountain climbers. I've had people that have a military background like me, and I highlight all these different type of backgrounds to expose what they're doing, how they've got to what they're doing, and how they're continuing to do it, what their future plans are. And my stipulation always for a guest is, how are they helping other people? So we are all going through a lot of stuff. Like, I ask you a question, like, what was something really hard that you went through in your life that you'll be able to hear on my podcast? And that was really special to me. And all the guests have shared something similar but different. So I want to highlight that you can go out there. Like I said, my No Quit Living story is a story. So I want to highlight other people's story of them going out there, and just, it's not always easy. But you know what? Like I said, stay true to yourself. And you know what? Even more so, you are the 139th guest, and these are 139 people that have gone out there, pursued careers that people thought that they couldn't do or that they shouldn't do. Here's how they did it. It wasn't easy, but they worked hard, they worked smart. And then one of the great answers that you gave me on my podcast is that they surrounded themselves with people that supported them, maybe people that in a mentorship role, or just friends that supported them, and equally they're supporting other people. So my podcast has, to answer your question a little bit more, has 2 segments where I interview people such as yourself, and then I have another segment where it's called Contemplations. The conversations where I interview guests, the Contemplations, is just me, and those are things that I learned in my life that I still don't want my listeners to miss, and I share it through a solo podcast, if you will, that's a lot shorter. And if I learn something in my life I struggled with, I turn it into a podcast episode and I share it.
You know, I'm not sure if our listeners picked up to something you just said in the beginning of that last answer, but you said, how are they helping other people? That's something that you ask on your show, and having been a guest, you asked me as well. And I think it's such a different spin on things, and I'm really glad that not only do you do that, but I'm honored to have been on your show, because I think that's what the opportunity is how can we help other people? How can we pay it forward? And the reality is we all come from different walks of life. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different careers, different family situations, different friends, relationships. But if you can ask other people, and if you can really live and believe that concept of, how are you helping other people, or how can I help you? And you touched on that beautifully in your show. So I have an interesting question for you, and I'm actually quite curious for your answer. If you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Relentless, or maybe obsessed. Relentlessly obsessed. Can I say 2 words? No, just kidding.
That's interesting. If you had said to me before you answered that 2 words, I don't think I would have said relentless and obsessed as either of my answers. So that's pretty cool. And all jokes aside, that's a question that obviously has no right or wrong answer. And the reason I asked the question too is because it's not an open-ended question, in the sense of, I don't know 99.9% of the guest answers. Now, if somebody has a book or something that is one word or something like that, then I could kind of take a stab at it. But I'm glad you touched on it. And obviously, a little bit similar but different to the no quit question is, I'm curious, how do you look at, or how have you addressed failure in either your personal or professional life?
It's something that I've embraced. I don't take well to failure, and I'm going to be honest with you. And one of the things I like how you answered questions on my podcast, you were very humble about how you answered them, and I want to overwhelmingly portray that in this answer as I say this. And it's going to be hard for me to say this, but I haven't had a ton of failure. And I know you were saying things like we all experience different things in our lives, all have different failures in our lives, and we all have different tragedies in our lives. And I have experienced failure. Like I said, I haven't gotten certain jobs because of the prerequisites. I didn't meet them, or certain things that I wanted to do, I just didn't make those in my life. But I think how I answered your previous question was relentless and obsessive. So I'm relentless and obsessive about planning. And I plan things to the T. And on the outside, it looks like I'm a huge risk taker. I left the Navy without college. I left the Navy maybe with not enough preparation for schooling, for IT courses, since I work in IT, all of the above that other people would never risk doing. But if you go in my head for 5 minutes and you dig around just a little bit and you don't look too much, you would see that I've actually done massive amounts of due diligence. And by the time that I take action, there's really not a lot of risk involved at all. So I've been able to mitigate failure with my obsessive relentless preparation in life. It's not to say that I haven't had failure. Like I said, I have definitely had failure in my life, whether it be sports. We've talked about sports together before, and I grew up playing sports. I had massive amounts of failure. And I will say that playing sports, both individual and team sports, have those were probably the best areas that I began to learn that. I mean, I started playing soccer at age 4. So I was able to have these lessons in failure, and I was not on a very good team growing up in our high school in our town. So I experienced failure a lot, and it's something that I struggled with and was very upset about. I didn't handle it well, and then not until, that's in my teens, when you're in high school, and not until I was probably in my mid-20s, and I came down the journey that led me to being on your podcast, is I had the mindset of failure isn't a bad thing, but I wasn't able to fully comprehend it because what I wasn't doing was a big step, and I wasn't learning from it or understanding why did I fail. So be able to be brutally honest with myself and understand why I failed. But because I've had this very self-conscious, self-reflection mindset is probably a better way to say it, and look in on myself and be true and honest with why I have failed in my life and understand why I did it. And I will say I'm not afraid of failure for what I'm about to say. I'm not afraid of failure because I know if I failed, I only failed because it wasn't because of a lack of preparation. So what I'm getting at is that as long as I know that I've done everything possible to prepare for something, if I've done everything possible to give 100% effort, and I've helped myself and I've helped other people in the process as much as I possibly could, then if I do fail, then it's failure and it sucks. I'm going to have to bite the bullet. But you know what? I've taken an oath with myself that I'm not going to get down on myself and stay in a downtrodden state about that. So I'm a planner, as I said earlier in the other question, and that comes in this as well, that I am going to do everything. I'm going to plan. I'm going to do everything possible in my life to be able to crush it. And if I don't make that goal or I don't make whatever it is, then that's the way it is. And what can I learn from that and move on?
So I'm curious with the next question, based on your military background, is there one guiding principle that you feel has influenced your success or your life to the level and to the place you're at today?
I think it goes on what our podcasts stand on a lot. I mean, there's a lot of aspects that we try to push through the podcast of inspiration, motivation, all of these type of things. But if I had to take it down to one thing, one of the things that I've been, again, quite obsessive with, since I'm going to use that and I'm going to prove to you why I selected those words, but I've been quite literally obsessed about highlighting other people and sharing their story. So like I said, I have the 2 segments within the podcast, and that's really what I want to do. And the one thing is just share stories of inspirational people and share a little bit of my story along the way. So the one thing is the sharing of stories and highlighting the conversation. So I guess at a very high level, sharing stories, it's just sharing the conversation. Have the conversation. I want people to have the conversation internally with themselves, and I want them to have that self-reflection, but I also want them to go out there into the world and have the conversation with other people as well, and to know that they don't have to have it all figured out within their own self before they go out into the world and have the conversation with somebody else.
No, I think the power of podcasting is at such a interesting level, and to your point, it's all about stories when you have a guest, and I think you do a fascinating job highlighting them, and I think that's obviously coming from having 139 different interviews where you have those conversations. And the reality is, and as you know this too, is you know a lot about your guest. I know a lot about my guests prior to them coming on, but what you don't know is how they're going to answer certain questions. And I think that's always the fun, but also for me, it's the exciting part, because it'd be really boring if I knew exactly what you were going to say. You know, in some ways I wouldn't have you on the show. I would just say, hey, I'm going to interview this guy and I'll just tell you what he's going to say.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And that's why I think it's good to have a podcast where you have a lot of the organic speech like we're having right now, but it's also good to have some static questions in there that never move, because it's really interesting to dissect guests answering them differently, like you've just articulated to us right now. And I think that uniqueness, that aspect in answering questions differently, proves to me that there's a million different ways to do something, but the fact that you can get it done, because everybody has a unique answer, but they're all answers. So that proves that they're out there and they're getting it done, but you can do it any way you want. You just got to find which way works for you.
So you did a great job teasing this on your show, and I'm curious to get your perspective, but one of the things we've been fascinated about is studying and dissecting different people's morning routines, and I was curious if you have a morning routine that you personally swear by.
Yeah, so I did tease this on my podcast, and this is, I guess, my vulnerable moment of one place where I am currently seeing consistent failure, and I'm still figuring it out for myself right now, and frankly, you asking the question, I was excited to answer it, because it's going to help me dissect why the hell I'm not doing it right now. So this is coming from, I said I was in the military. I had an injury, and 5 years ago now in the military, and not until about a year ago did it re-spark. It left me on the bathroom floor, couldn't move, wife taking care of me for 2 days. It was terrible. And my child was born. I couldn't really hold my 8-pound daughter for months, and I couldn't work out. And this is coming, I'm a very fit guy. So not until last November did I start working out again. Now, I give you this story not to have a pity party by any means, but I will say that before I had this injury, I had an airtight morning routine. And even more so, I'll highlight the fact that I had an airtight night routine, which led to the success of my airtight morning routine. I did the same thing every single night. I had lights off by 9 p.m. and I had what was called candle time. No lights on, only candles, and I would read in the bed before going to bed, and I would sleep great. I would wake up, to answer your question, at 4:30 every day. I would never snooze. If I snoozed, to answer a previous question, that was failure, so that was not an option. Woke up at 4:30, went immediately into my office, sat down on the ground, meditated for 5 minutes, and that was it. But I meditated every day. And then I went into gratitude, and I said, I just went through as many things as I possibly could do in my entire mind to go through things I was thankful for. That literally I just woke up out of bed again. I'm so thankful for that. I'm able to meditate again. I'm able to even practice gratitude. Thank you so much. All of these things like that. And then I would, at the time, drive to the gym, go to the gym by 5:30, and then go to work already by 6:30. And I went to work early every single day. So I had this routine that was led up to initiated by my night routine. Fast forward to the injury, I completely wiped away everything I just told you. Like it was devastating, and I had a lot of moments of depression. Not only it was a lot of reasons. You know, I couldn't hold my daughter. All the hard work, a lot of my body was atrophying, and I'll tell you. And this is my honest moment, and my frustration comes with even answering this question. I feel like an idiot, quite frankly, that it's been about 4 months now, and I still haven't been able to find my morning routine with the physical aspect of it, or something that's really awakened me like I used to have it. And I think the person listening would be like, well, just do what you used to do. And I know that's the answer, and I'd love to hear your response here. But what I've been doing now is that I do wake up, but I wake up later around 6, and I go straight into reading. And I'm reading a book a week for a year, and I read every single morning, 7 days a week. And I've been able to, and I started this challenge when I wasn't able to work out. So I took a bad thing of not being able to work out, having a slaughtering of my morning routine and my night routine, and I was able to siphon that into a morning routine to where I was still exercising my mind instead of my body. And now I'm still doing the darn book a week for a year thing, and I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate both of them right now. So it's been a struggle, and it hasn't been easy, but that's probably the fullest answer I can give you.
No, I truly appreciate your transparency on that answer, and it's another one of those questions that A, has no right or wrong answer, and B, I never fully know what somebody's gonna share. So I want to just touch on one thing that you said early on, and I have no magic words nor amazing advice as far as how to do it or how to jump into it. The one thing I would say, if I have any advice to share, is to just reverse engineer and start slowly and aim for a victory or two, where you don't just jump into saying, okay, I'm going to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning tomorrow and work out for 4 hours. But I would say, if you're getting up at 6, maybe try 10 or 15 minutes early one day. But I think the thing that I wanted to touch on, just real brief, what you said is when you had your airtight morning routine, you had your airtight evening routine. And I have to be completely honest with you, it wasn't until quite a few of our guests actually shared the importance of the evening routine and being very candid here. I always looked at a morning routine as, it's just a morning routine. You get up at X time and you do these 2 or 3 or 4 things and that's it. And it wasn't until so many people spoke about the importance of an evening routine, and then I went back and reverse engineered, and I was like, wait a second, those days where I eat poorly or eat really late at night, I think it's interesting because those are the days where my workout stinks or I'm really feeling and the days when I'm really tired and I go to bed watching TV for an hour or two, I don't sleep as well. And I think long-winded, but the reality is those people that have those amazing morning routines typically have a very specific evening routine where, to your point, lights out and I drink, I have a glass of water laid out and I have my clothes laid out. And I think it's simple. And I think the reason people change or tweak it is because they do something different. So not to offer you any advice, but I think if you could reverse engineer just back to what's gone well for you, I'm sure you'll probably jump right back into it.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And that's part of the beauty of these podcasts is they're conversations between human beings that are just, it's not this just a show, right? Like we're having real conversation, and I appreciate that.
So you touched on something that my listeners know, that I'm a avid reader myself. So a book a week for a year, I know a lot of people that have heard of that challenge or have been told or actually been given that challenge. So anything that you've read recently or currently reading that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, the one I just got done, and we said we had a mutual friend, Jeff. He recommended me the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. I just finished that, and it is phenomenal. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. What are you reading next?
I'm reading 10% Happier, and I can't remember the gentleman who wrote it right now, but he's a journalist, and he struggled with, I'm barely touching the surface right now, but he struggled with drug addiction, alcohol abuse, I think a little bit. And essentially he is talking about and you just talked to me about my morning routine, just try for a little bit, 10 minutes earlier. But he's going into why and explaining why just doing 10% happier is a good start rather than 0% happier, 0% of nothing, right? So I can't speak to that one too well right now, and that's not the best answer that I want to give for that, but still going through it. But so far, really good, and I love the way we're answering questions is the way he writes the book. Is he's very real about his experiences, and he shares everything, and I can really appreciate that in an author.
No, it's awesome. And for the structure of the book a week, do you have 52 books that are set already, or are you getting recommendations? How are you going about that?
No, I found what's really fun about this challenge is that people just recommend books. So I either get book recommendations from the books I read, or I post it on social media and people go, oh, you should check this one out. And so if it aligns with what I'm reading, I do have specific genres. I mean, I read, these growth books. I also read a lot of financial books. So essentially the self-help or financial book, as long as it fits within that category, I'll take it. Like I reread Rich Dad, Poor Dad for like the 100th time or something like that. But things like that. But no, it's not, I didn't have 52 planned out. It's funny, I'm a planner, but I did not have that planned out because I thought, I found out that I'm getting a lot of great suggestions from the exposure that the challenge is giving.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I will definitely give you some recommendations because I myself asked this question to every guest, and I've read quite a few of the books that people have recommended, but I've been given and just found out about some amazing books that I've gone on to read that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. Looking forward to it.
So going back to the 20-year-old version of yourself, and now we're going to assume that he would listen to you, what's the one piece of advice you would have liked to have given the 20-year-old Chris?
That's a phenomenal question, and that was a very interesting time in my life. I was just talking about this current book that I'm reading right now, and the things that he struggled with, I struggled with as well. I've talked about this before in my own podcast, but for your listeners, I struggled with being a very selfish individual, and I really enjoyed drinking, and I was into some drugs as well, and I was very, like I said, a selfish person. This is pre-military. I didn't join the military until I was 22. So I think I would have told myself, and I probably wouldn't have listened. That's for sure. But I would have told myself to just stop. Just stop for a moment, experience silence. Why are you doing what you're doing, and where are you going to go with it? And really just have those moments. And I know the world we live in now is a lot more fast paced. And I find myself now trying to heed my own advice that I'm trying to give my 20-year-old self right now is just slow down and really think about what you're doing and why you're doing those things. Because I'll tell you, 20-year-old me had no idea why he was doing the things he was doing. He was just doing them because it was fun in the moment, and I really didn't have a plan of what I wanted to do. So I would hope that he would listen and just stop for a moment and really think about what he wanted to do in this world and start with that.
I think that's great advice, and I think most 20-year-olds, myself included, need to slow down a little bit, and I think that would have been good advice for me. And I think the word you said too was silence. I think we all could just use a little bit more silence every now and then, and I think as 20-year-olds, I think the reality is the last thing we're thinking about is slowing down and silence. We're probably thinking about speeding up and as loud and crazy as we can go.
No, that was definitely the case.
So if I had the opportunity or the power to grant you dinner with any individual, dead or alive, who would you pick and why?
That's a great question. I really like that question. And let's see. I would probably go there. First of all, just like there's so many good books out there, you said there's so many people that I would just be so humbled to speak with. But I will say one of the books that I did read in this challenge was a biography on General George S. Patton. And what I found really interesting about that book was, again, I'm a huge fan of hearing the stories of people, but it wasn't just like highlight after highlight after highlight. So for me, it was very interesting to see all of his highlights, but all of the self-doubt that this massively successful United States general experienced. Massive, massive self-doubt, and he failed out of a lot of his stuff that he did, speaking of failure. So this is just off my top of my head. Like I said, there are probably 100 other ones, but I think because I read that book and I learned a lot more about him, I think it's really interesting to look into the lives of somebody like that. And I'd love to ask him, honestly, some of the questions we've been asking each other tonight, ask him to somebody like him specifically to answer your question, but people like that as well.
You know, it's obviously I did not know you were going to answer that question. And one of my favorite quotes is, one of his quote is, "A good plan violently executed right now is far better than a perfect plan executed next week." And one of my mentors in my financial business said that to me and shared it with me after the first time we actually met. And it was interesting because the first time I heard it, I was kind of like, and he said it during the meeting, and then he sent me an email with the quote in it, and I was kind of like, all right, that's kind of cool. But the more I think about it, it's such a powerful quote, because we all think about this perfect day or this perfect event or perfect business or perfect plan, and don't get me wrong, it's so important to plan and to be obsessive, as you said before, with how you're going to do it, but nothing is ever perfect. And I think so many of us, myself included, probably have missed out on opportunities waiting for perfection as opposed to just jumping into it. So now my follow-up question to that is, do you yourself have a favorite quote?
You know, I don't really, and I hate to not answer a question fully or at all. I don't really. I just, and this is probably really cheesy, Chris, but I love the things that I learn from all of my guests. Some of the things I hear, like I can't read them in books, and I'm not going to read them anywhere, hear them anywhere else. But I'll give you an example of one of my more recent favorite quotes was one from one of my guests, Aaron Singerman, who is the CEO of Redcon One, which is a supplement company. And we were talking about children. And I know you have children. I have a 1-year-old. She's about to turn 1 this Saturday, and it's blowing my mind how amazing parenthood is. And I always heard before I was a parent that kids are expensive. kids will suck the money out of you, and so on and so forth, in this crescendo of these synonyms of negativity surrounding kids. And so when I talked to Aaron, I asked him some questions about family because I was interested. I asked a lot of questions about things that I'm genuinely curious about. And he said, you know what? Having kids made me rich. And I said, wow, that's really profound, Aaron. Why do you say that? And he said, because when I had kids and I learned the love that is having kids, I work that much harder for myself to be a better person for myself and to work harder for them to provide them a better life and be a better leader in their lives. I was like, damn it. that is some powerful stuff right there. So I think being able to pull a quote from one of my guests is really special to me because I love my podcast and my podcast guests. It's very, very one of the most incredible things I've ever been able to be a part of in my entire life. So I'd love to answer it like that. I think that's really special.
For our listeners that want to connect with you, follow you, or more importantly, check out your podcast, what is the best way for them to do that? And anything else you have as far as contact information for anybody who would like to check your stuff out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can head over to kristoflewis.com/podcast or check out the Kristof Lewis Podcast, Create Your Career, on any major podcast app. You can head over to YouTube, search the same, and subscribe. I love having the guests. I love having the audio, but I love having the video as well. It's really cool to be able to watch. So you'll see that on YouTube, but on any other major podcast app as well. And then you can head over to Instagram at Kristof Lewis, KRISTOF LEWIS. And I'm pretty active. I post every day there. And I just really enjoy connecting with not only the guests, but I love connecting with the listeners because a lot of the listeners, quite frankly, have become guests.
As all, that is so true on my end as well. So I think that's powerful. So definitely I would recommend our listeners to not only check out your show, but to check you out on social media as well. And then the last question I have for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my parting words would be just a conglomeration, consolidation of everything that we discussed here today. So one of the things that I care about most is when I talk to you about my no-quit story was being true to yourself and not listening to what other people think you should do. I started the podcast for many reasons, but one of the reasons was like I said, to highlight the stories of other people, because so many times in my life, people told me that I was never going to be able to do what I wanted to do, be happy doing what I wanted to do, or make money. Like those are all just separate avenues, and I couldn't drive down the same street, there are two different streets at once. So that's completely not true at all. I've been able to do that, and I've been able to continue to do that, and I've been continue to highlight people that are doing that as well. So I'm very obsessed about that's what I would want you to do. My parting words would be to stay true to yourself. If you want to go do something, do it. And you know what? If it turns out it sucks, like you said about your plan, just do it now and find out earlier that it doesn't work out or that it's not something that you really enjoy. But listen to yourself, figure out what you really want to go do it. And one of my stipulations, like I said, for guests always is to show people that are helping other people. So do everything that I just said, the best of your ability and tailored to you, not the way I'm doing it, not the way Chris is doing it, tailored to you, and help somebody else along the way, because I guarantee you that somebody else is going through exactly what you're going through, whether you think it or not. I guarantee you that.
I could not agree more with what you just said, is help somebody else along the way. And I think to your point, you've clearly focused on it, which is highlighting other people. And I think it goes to one of the hashtags that we're using quite often, which is we rise by lifting others up. So my man, I truly appreciate it. I definitely recommend our listeners to check out your show. I think episode or guest number 139, they should check him out too. That was a good guest. No, but listen, my man, I appreciate it. I hope we can connect again soon. And thank you again so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I really love having these conversations, if you can't tell. So no, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to episode number 251. As an avid reader myself, I think it is awesome that Kristof took on the challenge of reading one book a week for 52 straight weeks. I really like how he shares other people's stories on his podcast and understands the importance and value in learning from others. In his parting words, Kristof stressed the importance of being true to yourself and not listening to what other people tell you you can or can't do. So I challenge you today, to remain true to yourself and never limit what you can do or can't do based upon what somebody else tells you. So as you go for your greatness today, remember, we rise by lifting others up.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.